Hello everybody, welcome to another limited set review from me, Robot Rallis. Today we're doing Dominaria United. In our first video we're going to do multicolor and colorless. The next video will be green and red, the video after that will be black and blue, and the last video will be white and colorless, and a brief conversation about archetypes. For now, the first thing we're going to go over is my limited rating criteria, and I have a 1 to 10 scale that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different main categories. 1 and 2 make up cards that you shouldn't be playing in your main deck almost ever. That includes sideboard cards and cards that are not supported archetypes or just aren't worth it. 3, 4, and 5, which are your actual main components of your deck. Most commons are going to fit into this category of 3, 4, or 5. Porcelain filler, filler, and good filler. 6 and 7, which are among the best cards in the set as far as limited playability, which is great and first pickable cards. Then we have 8 and 9, which is god tier, like mythic uncommons and things that are basically design mistakes and should have been rares. And then 10 is unbeatable and basically an unattainable score. The only way that a card would be a 10 is if there's basically no way to beat it once it gets played against you, and when you see it you pivot every single thing you're doing in order to play it. So with all of that already done and out of the way, let's get into it. We're starting out with the uncommons, the multicolor ones specifically, because I think they give you a great idea of what's happening in the set and what sort of things you should be looking for when you're building decks. So Aran, Bernalillo's Ruin, is white, white, black for a 3/3 with Menace, and white, black, tap, sacrifice another creature. Put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. This is a pretty good card. It passes a vanilla test, it beats down relatively well, and that activated ability is actually pretty handy in a color combination that has a good amount of recursion and some relatively expendable bodies with good effects on death. So I'm going to give this card a 5. I don't think it quite reaches up into 6 territory, mostly because it's kind of hard to cast. This is a card I'm looking to get a little bit later on in the pack, definitely not something I'm trying to first pick. Baird, Argivian Recruiter. I'm going to give this one a pretty good grade. I think it's a lot better than the last one because it's a 2 mana 2/2 at face value and a much easier to cast. But let's go through the power and toughness and text. It's also a 2/2 for a red and a white, and at the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature with power greater than its base power, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. It is actually pretty easy to get this to happen. There's a lot of things, there's enter the battlefield abilities, attack triggers, spells, enchantments, all kinds of things that are going to give your creatures some boosts in power, especially one of the set mechanics, Enlist. And this is a great way to get some bonus value out of it. So it's a 2/2 that has a function in the early game, and in the late game it can start churning out things if you find any kind of way to attack and make trades. So I think I'm giving this one a 5 as well. Now we have Balmor, Battle Mage Captain. This card is really good. So it's a blue and a red for a 1/3 flyer, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, all of your creatures get +1/+0 and gain trample until end of turn. That's a pretty great confluence of abilities, and I'm surprised that this card doesn't cost 3 mana. I'm going to use it, of course. In fact, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. I think this card is really good, definitely one of the better uncommons as far as what it asks of you. Giving all of your creatures +1/+0 is really good. You're easily able to turn a bunch of really bad attacks into really good attacks, and really good blocks for your opponent into really bad blocks for your opponent. And all that on a body that is pretty aggressively costed. So it's a 6 for Balmor, and we're going to keep moving on. Bortok Bone Rattle is for a black and a green for a 4/4 Troll Shaman with Domain. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, choose target creature card in your graveyard. Return it to the battlefield if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of basic land types among lands you control. Otherwise, put it into your hand. So the floor is you play this and you get a creature back to your hand. That's already a great floor. This card would be pretty easily a 5 if that's all it did, but you can also just randomly my stuff back directly into play. And there's a few cards in the set that are absolutely exquisite to get back. There's some Death Touch creatures, there's just random value creatures, Getting any of those things back would be excellent. And if you can dump it directly into play off of the domain ability, it's excellent and moves up to a 6. I think this card is just a 6. I think it has enough upside and potential value on its face to where you're never going to be disappointed. And the fail case is you don't cast it. If you do cast it, the fail case is you're going to get something back into your hand and have a sizable body on the battlefield. And that's way more than a lot of cards are going to get you. With other cards, like Baird and with Aaron, you actually have to have them stick around. You have to do other things. This card, it doesn't need any setup at all. You just play limited. Cards are going to go into your graveyard, and you're going to want to get them back. So, Bortuk Bone Rattle, easy 6. Elas Il-Kor, Sadistic Pilgrim. Actually, you know what? I'm going to revise that. I think Bortuk is closer to a 7 than a 6. So I would consider this a pretty easily first pickable card in a lot of packs. Yep, I think 7 is right for Bortuk. Next we have Elas Il-Kor, Sadistic Pilgrim, which is a white and a black for a 2/2 Death Touch creature with whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So this is a pretty cool creature. I like this one a lot. It's a nice early drop. It helps you gain a little bit of life, stymie the tide of aggression if you're trying to build up a board state to get ready for some kind of mass pump or game plan. And then if you're going to start enforcing trades later in the game, or your opponent's at a low life total, they're going to have to make some pretty tough calls once they start losing life to this thing. And it has Death Touch. So worst case scenario, you can trade it off for something if you're starting to get beat down a little too hard on the ground, and it trades up pretty well. I'm going to give this one a 6. It doesn't ask a lot of you, and it does a lot for you. Next we have Garner, Bloodfist of Keld, 1 black-red-red, for a 4/3 legendary human berserker. Whenever another creature you control dies, draw a card if it was attacking, otherwise Garner, Bloodfist of Keld deals 1 damage to each opponent. Similar to Elas Il-Kor, in that it does want you to have your creatures die, but it wants them to be attacking. However, they don't have to be attacking for you to get a benefit. The attacking clause is definitely good, and there's going to be times when you play a Garner and you just swing your random 2/2 into them, wondering if they'll just take the 2 damage or kill it on blocks. And if they kill it on blocks, you get a card out of it, and cool, you've replaced your pointless 2/2. And if they don't block, they take 2 damage, and you're 2 damage closer to killing them. One of the things that makes this card a little bit less good is that it's not as good on defense. You do get the bonus damage off of creatures dying when they don't die in combat when they're attacking. But overall, I think it's still a fine card. It just isn't quite as good as Elas, and for that reason I'm going to give it a 5, a little closer to a 5 than a 6, but it's still really good, and I think if you're in black-red you're going to be happy to see it. Next we have Legomos, Hand of Hatred, 1 a black and a red for a 1/3 that has, at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 2/1 red elemental creature token with trample and haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step, and you can tap, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle, but you can only activate that ability if 5 or more creatures died this turn. 5 is a lot. You're basically never going to be making that happen unless you have some kind of crazy sacrifice synergy going on and a ton of stuff going on the battlefield, and then I'm sure it'll be a good ability to use, but I'm not really taking that into account too much when evaluating, considering I think it'll happen less than 1 in 50 times that you play it out. So the first ability, creating the 2/1 with trample and haste, is actually not bad. So there's a few different things that happen when you attack with a completely expendable creature. A lot of times your opponent will block. 1, because they don't want to take 2 damage every turn, and 2, because it's just a 2/1. 2/1 is relatively easy to block, relatively profitably. The problem for them happens when you have ways to use it, like especially in black-red, you have Bone Splinters, and getting a 2/1 that you can sacrifice to kill anything for basically free is excellent. And then you have other combat tricks, and if for some reason they kill your 2/1 in response to you using a combat trick to try and win a combat, well, you've lost a 2/1 that was going to be sacrificed anyway. So I think Legomos is solid, but I don't think it makes it to 6. I think it is a 5 unless you have the components inside your deck to make great use of it, at which point it can become a 6. But I don't think this is a first pickable, and I don't think this is a standout bomb inside of that deck. I think it is just an above average playable. Now we have Nail, Avizoa Aeronaut, which is a 2/4 for 2, a green and a blue, with flying, and Domain. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. Put up to one of them on top of your library and the rest on the bottom in a random order. Then if there are 5 basic land types among lands you control, draw a card. So the biggest problem I see with this is that it's a 4-mana 2/4, and you have to go all the way to the next turn and attack your opponent and connect in order to get it to work, and that's not always going to happen. It's going to happen a good amount of the time, but you're not always the beatdown, and your reward for being the beatdown and doing all this is you get to index. Now, a lot of the time, I think in this format you're going to be doing domain stuff for somewhere between 2 and 4 on average. Definitely closer to 3 than 4. Probably an average of 2 to 3, with 4 on the high end, and 5 if you're just extremely fortunate and you did all the things right during the draft. Even with that, I don't think this card really does enough. I think that this is a fine card. I would put it at an okay playable, but that's a 4. I don't really feel comfortable giving this a 5 out of 10, and for that reason I'm just going to move on to the next card. Najal, the Stormrunner. That is 2 blue, blue, and red for a 5/4 that says you may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash, and whenever it attacks you may pay 2. If you do, you copy the next instant or sorcery spell you cast this turn. This card is a beating. When my opponent plays this, I need to remove it because the next turn, if they attack and pay 2, I do not feel like there's anything I can do to kill it. I'm going to be taking 5 because I don't feel safe blocking, double blocking, or triple blocking. And the lines of play I can imagine with this card in play are just so beyond absurd. One combat trick turns into giving this thing like +6/+6 or something silly like that. One removal spell turns all of your blocks into absolute trash, possibly wipe your board even. And the fact that it gives your sorcery spells flash, there's so much you can do with this. This is a must kill, and for that reason, I think it is bordering on 7, but kind of a little bit closer to 6 because of its restricted mana cost. If you're in blue-red and this card gets passed to you, pick it up. You're not going to be disappointed. It will win games for you just based on the ability alone. Next we have Queen All-in-All of Ruodak, which is green, white, white for a star with power and toughness equal to the number of creatures you control. So by itself it is a 1/1, but in green, white there's actually a good number of ways to create more tokens and creatures than just the ones you have on the cards. And if one or more tokens would be created under your control, that many plus 1/1 white soldier creature token are created instead. So it's obvious what this wants you to do. Create a bunch of tokens and it'll make you more tokens. But it is just a beater. At the end of the day, this is green, white, white for a beater that makes your token production better. It requires a lot of setup, and the payoff is solid, but at the end of the day, this is a synergy type card, not a self-contained engine, and the things that it asks of you are actually not free. You don't just have infinite creature token production, you have to take a lot of those cards. It isn't like some of the blue-red payoffs where you just have to pick spells, and there's a lot of spells in the format. There's not that many things that are going to be producing tokens for you. There's a good number of them, but they're not free. And Queen of the Ruodak, all in all, I would give this card a 5. Definitely not a 6, and way, way, way far away from 7, especially with the restricted mana cost. Why this was green, white, white, and not green, white, 1 is beyond me, but hey, their choice, they make the cards, I just rate them. Next we have Rada Coalition Warlord, which is 2, a red and a green for a 3/3 with Domain. Whenever it becomes tapped, another target creature you control gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. At first, I thought that this card was really, really bad, because I do not like having to attack with my 4 mana 3/3 to get some kind of marginal ability, but then I remembered that one of the set mechanics is enlist, and if you're enlisting the help of this creature and adding 3 power to your creature, and then an additional minimum 2 additional power and toughness to your creature, that's turning your 1/1 into a 5/3, and your 3/3 into a 7/5. Like, that's a pretty sizable boost in power and toughness. So I think this card is actually really good, and if you're inside of the green-red color combination or the domain deck, you're going to be very, very happy to see this if you play domain, not just domain cards, but you're going to be happy to see this if you play cards with Enlist as well. On its face value, if you're not doing any of that stuff and you don't have the synergy between the domain and the, Enlist, I think this card goes down to a 4, but if you're doing that, this could easily be a 6, one of the better cards inside your deck, because it just makes your random bullshit creatures absolutely massive. Wrath Weatherlight Stalwart is a white and a blue for a 1/3 that looks like it should have flying but doesn't, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may tap 2 untapped creatures you control. If you do, draw a card, and then you can spend 3 a white and a white, which is actually not that much mana, for +1/+1 and vigilance until end of turn for all of your creatures, which is a pretty solid ability. So there is some token production, as we were saying earlier, with cards like Queen All-in-All of Rodok. There's not too much of it, but there's a good amount. If you have a bunch of 1/1s laying around and they're not doing anything like attacking or blocking, this card is going to be pretty cool, because you can cast a random removal spell, maybe even one of the better counter spells or something in the format, and get a free card off of your random 1/1s. And then later in the game, if you start to do some good attacks, you can use this +1/+1 in vigilance to kind of ambush if you don't have anything better to do, or to set up better blocks. I think that this card is a 5 that borders closer to a 6 if you have a lot of things to do with this first ability. Otherwise, 5 is definitely where it rests. I think it passes the vanilla test well enough, and the second ability would probably be enough to bring it to about a 5 normally, so the other ability just kind of gives it an extra little boost. Rona, Sheoldred's Faithful, is our next card. 1 blue and black for a 3/4 with whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, each opponent loses 1 life, and you may cast it from your graveyard by discarding 2 cards in addition to paying its other costs. I really, really like this card. The difficulty in the casting cost is actually quite fitting, because being able to cast something from your graveyard just with the cost of discarding 2 cards is really good. It doesn't ask way too much of you, especially if you're in blue-black. You're going to be playing some of those better removal spells that blue and black have, and you're going to have a lot of card advantage because that color combo is filled with ways to use your mana every single turn. So you're going to cast spells, you're going to have some extra cards, especially in the later game, and sometimes those cards are going to be lands. And sometimes they're not going to be lands, but they're not as good as having a 3/4 on board. So I think this card is a 5, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of times where it plays closer to a 6, but it is going to be pretty annoying for your opponent, because even if you have a late game board stall where you don't have anything going on and you're just drawing lands, you can pitch those lands, get this back, and then you just have an extra body on board, and that's really good. A lot of cards are not that good at just sticking around and making use of your excess lands. In fact, excess land draws are one of the primary ways that you just lose games of Magic. So I'm pretty happy with this at 5. The format could pan out to where it's a 6, but I think I'm comfortable with 5 right now. Rulik Mon's Warren Chief is 1 red and a green. Green's an interesting mana cost on a goblin, but hey, here we are. For a 3/3 with Menace, well, y'all already know how I feel about 4 mana 3/3s with almost any ability. We'll see if this one lives up to the hype. Whenever it attacks, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it onto the battlefield tapped. If you didn't put a card onto the battlefield this way, create a 1/1 red goblin creature token. So if for some reason you don't want to draw a card and put it into play for free, you will get a 1/1 if there was a land on top, and if there wasn't a land on top, you're going to get the 1/1 either way. I think this card's actually pretty good. The Menace makes it interesting, and in green-red specifically, there's a pretty good number of combat tricks and ways to augment your creatures to make it a little more difficult for them to punish you. On the whole, I think that this card is going to play more like a 5 than a 6, but there's definitely going to be times where it seems like your opponent just has it all, and this card feels like a 7 when it definitely isn't. I would say if you're in green-red and you have ways to augment creatures, and this isn't just going to get double blocked and killed by a random 2/1 and like a 4/5 or something, then yeah, totally play it in your deck. At 5, if you ask me. Tatyova, Steward of Tides, is green-green-blue, which is an extremely restrictive mana cost, but you don't mind because you actually want to play this one later in the game, for a 3/3 with land creatures you control have flying. Now, there aren't a lot of man lands in the set, in fact I don't think there's any, so we're going to be looking at the second ability here because it's the only way that that ability works in Limited. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands, which means your 7th land drop will trigger this, up to one target land you control becomes a 3/3 elemental creature with haste. It's still a land. Notice that it does not say until end of turn, it just stays a 3/3 elemental creature with haste forever. So if Tatiova's gone, it loses flying, but you know what, that is okay. I think this card is amazing. It's one of the few ways to turn your late game land drops into something that's useful, similar to Rona. However, it also has the benefit of making flying 3/3s when it's in play, and that's really good. I think getting a 3/4 back is good, but making flying 3/3s with haste is a little bit better, so I'm going to give Tatyova a 6. It doesn't come close to a 7 because of the very restrictive mana cost and the real difficulty in trying to splash a card like this if you're not dedicated to blue-green, but I think I'm very happy with the 6. Now we have Tori, I'm not trying to pronounce that, Fury Rider, so we'll just call this Tori, which is 1 red, red, and white for a 3/3 with Vigilance and Trample. We have another 4 mana 3/3, let's see if this one can redeem itself. Whenever it attacks, all other attacking creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Red creatures that are attacking gain Trample, and white creatures that are attacking untap. This is a powerful ability, but it kind of feels a little bit lackluster. It wants you to turn all of your creatures sideways, and that's not a thing you're doing very often in Limited, unless you have, well, everything. Unless you have a way to pump your board, unless you have a way to make your opponent's blocks really bad, and you're not always going to have that. And God forbid you're ever on the backswing with this thing. Like, if you're under the gun and you play out your 4 mana 3/3, it just doesn't feel very good. I think, on average, this card's going to play like a 4, and there will be times when your opponent has it against you, and you're on the back foot and it feels like a 6 or higher, but I don't think this card is like a 5. I think this is definitely a level 4 card, and sometimes if you have the right deck for it, it'll be a level 5 card that you should take accordingly. But I think in a lot of decks, I'm going to be a little happier taking a removal spell, unless I'm all beat down all the time, and I can make this card feel like a 6 once it's in play. Now we have Tura Kennarood Skynight, which is 2 white, blue, blue, for a 3/3 with flying, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 soldier creature token that is white. It feels like they should make 1/1 flyers, especially since it's a 5 mana 3/3, and a 5 mana 3/3 is extremely fragile. It dies to a lot of things, and it doesn't really do too well in combat. I mean, hell, later on you're going to see a 2 mana common that this literally trades for. 1/1s are also not that big of a bonus. I think if you have the deck for it and your opponent doesn't remove it, this can definitely create value for you. So I think it is a 5, but it's a low 5. It definitely doesn't come close to a 6. I'm not super duper eager to take it and play it in the early stages of the pack. This is like a I'm already in blue-white and I want to play cards that are good. This is a card that will give me some utility out of my spells. And then there's going to be blue-white decks that don't even have that many spells, and you're just going to feel stupid for even trying to play this, because you have like 3 instants or sorceries, and then you have a 5-mana 3/3 flyer that every once in a while will make you a 1/1, and that's just not good. So I'm on 5. It's almost bordering on being a 4, but I think it does just enough to make it and squeak out that 5. Next we have an interesting one, a Frog Beast. Berg, spawn of Turg, which is black, black, green for a star 5 with power equal to the number of lands in your graveyard. So this is an interesting one. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put it into your graveyard, and then you can pay a black and a green and sacrifice a land to gain 2 life. So it wants you to dump those lands into the graveyard, and that's a fine enough ability, but ultimately this card is just a very difficult to cast beater. And usually cards that don't do much besides be beaters are cards that I don't want to give high ratings. I think if you're on a board stall, the card filtering is nice, but I don't really feel too comfortable giving this card a 6. I think it'll play closer to a 5. And that's kind of all I have to say. It's interesting that you have the ability to sacrifice the lands to bump up its power during combat and stuff, but I don't think that brings it up to a 6. Vohar, Bodalian Desecrator, is a blue and a black for a 1/2 with tap, draw a card, then discard a card. If you discarded an instant or sorcery card, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And you can also pay 2 and sacrifice it to cast a target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn, and then exile it if you cast it. This card is really good. It's really good in the early stages of the game, because you can play it, start looting, get your hand a little better, and then in the late game you can cash it in for a spell. You can even play it and immediately cash it in for a spell if you're way late in the game and you don't want to wait a turn to try and loot. Notably, you don't have to tap it to sacrifice it either, so you can loot and then tap and sacrifice it to get your immediate value off that spell. I think this card is really good. I think this card is approaching a 7, especially in the domain decks that are going to be playing lots of different land types and have the mana. This is going to be a very good card that's going to buy you back some of the best spells in your deck. And if you're playing like random blue-red or something, you can mize your way into some black sources, you're going to play this card, because being able to buy back those spells is really solid. I think that definitely puts this card in 7 territory, because you're going to try and make excuses to play it, because it's just that good. If you play it on turn 2, it's good. It keeps its value in the late game. That's also good. Now we have the final uncommon that is multicolor, Tsar or Janin, Scion of Efrava. And it's a 3 green and white for a 4/4. And I like 5-mana 4/4s a lot more than I like 4-mana 3/3s. With Domain, whenever it becomes tapped, put a counter on each creature you control with toughness less than the number of basic land types among lands you control. Notably, it just says become tapped. It does not have to attack in order to get this bonus, which is another point towards enlist. And in green-white, once again, this wants you to aim towards making a lot of creature tokens, so that you have more things to put counters on, but this doesn't demand that you make tokens. If anything, it demands that you either make tokens or have the domain deck. And if you have the domain deck, and you can reliably get 3 or even 4 for your domain count, this is going to be an extremely powerful card, because it's going to just pump up your board constantly if you have enlist creatures, or you have ways to attack with this without this just dying on the spot. Even if you only get the 1 trigger, and even if you just trade with something and pump up 2 of your creatures that are like 1/1 tokens, or a pair of your 2/2s into 3/3s or something, this card is going to be very impressive and very good. So I'm going to give this a 7. It wants you to be a bit creature-centric and domain-centric, but it's pretty powerful, and it is definitely a reason to go down that path. That does it for our multicolor uncommons. Now we're going to move over to artifacts. And we're not going to put on a filter, we're just going to go through all of them. Oh, we're sorting the wrong way. There we go. Automatic Librarian is a 3-mana 3/2 with, when it enters the battlefield, scry 2. There's not actually a whole lot of cards in the format that care about you playing artifacts. There's not anything that really cares about historic spells, and artifact matters is not a theme that's supported whatsoever. So really, this is just the 3-mana 3/2 that anyone can play that gets you a neat little scry 2 when it comes into play. Scry 2 is solid, and in the late game, Scry 2 goes up massively, but I don't think this card is anything more than a 3. You don't really want to play it. The only reason you're playing this is because you literally do not have cards that are better, like almost any other 3/2 in your color combination, and there's a lot of 3/2s out there that you can play that'll be better than this. So I'm going to give it 3 to Automatic Librarian. Perhaps if there were some artifact synergies it would go higher, but nope. Next we have Meteorite. Meteorite is a 5-mana artifact that says when it enters the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target, and it has tap add 1 mana of any color. This is a good card. In a format where you're trying to splash big powerful spells, it is better, but there is one problem. A lot of the big powerful spells also have domain, and one of the reasons that you're going to be playing multicolor is because of domain. Generally, you want to get your mana fixing from the lands, like the cycle of tapped duels that have 2 different basic land types, but you can still play Meteorite, and this is definitely a textbook 4. There will be times when you're very happy to see this, and it's like your 23rd card. There's going to be times when you just can't find room for a 5-mana shock that has mana ramp attached to it, and there will be decks where you just don't want that in your deck at all, but you still end up having to play it. So I think that makes it a textbook 4, and we're going to move on. Salvaged Mana Worker is a 2-mana 1/3 with an activated ability that says 1. Add 1 mana of any color, activate only once each turn. This is a pretty cool card. This enables a lot of splashes, but it doesn't help you out with domain, and for that reason I think it's going to sit in some of the blue-black control decks as a nice defensive creature that helps you cast some of your spells and your kicker costs. And I think it's also going to sit in some of the domain decks as a way to help you when your mana is looking a little dodgy, because you're going to be playing a good number of tap lands that aren't always the exact colors you're looking for. However, this is a risk versus reward kind of card, because it is just a 2-mana 1/3, and a 1/3 does not really hold its own in combat that well. It's also fragile. So if you start to cast spells off this thing, and your opponent sees that and they kill it, well, that can go poorly for you. So keep that in mind, and I'm giving Salvaged Mana Worker a... that's a good question. I think in the decks where you really want this card, it's going to play like a 5, and in a lot of other decks it's going to play closer to a 4, where you're not entirely disappointed to see it, and it'll help you out with some things, but it's not really like a good card. It's just a filler. Shieldwalled Sentinel is next, and this is a pretty goofy one. It is a 4-mana 1/3 golem with Defender, and when it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a creature card with Defender, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. So, at face value, since it's a common, you can get a bunch of these and just do the thing. But there's also more than just Shieldwalled Sentinel in the set as far as defenders. There's actually a good number of them, and some of them are actually pretty good. There's even one that drains your opponent and one that mills your opponent. So I think this card is still a 3. And in the deck where you're doing Defenders Matter, it goes up to a 4. But I don't think it's a good card. I don't think the Defenders Matters deck is a good deck, and I think You can do it for fun, and you might be able to mise some games, but you're better off just trying to find your lane at the table, because I can almost guarantee you this should not be it. So Shield Wall Sentinel gets a 3, and in some decks it's going to play more like a 2. Vanquisher's Axe is our first equipment, and it is a 1-mana equipment with Equip 2, and equipped creature gets +2/+0. So in the decks that are trying to force trades, like the red-black and the green-white decks, you're going to be a little happy playing this card. The equip cost is not too terribly high, and putting this on your random nonsense 1/1 soldier token is going to turn it into a 3/1, which attacks and blocks a whole lot better. Even so, I think this card is still only going to be like a 4. It's definitely a 23rd card kind of situation. You'd much rather something that sticks around on board, also has power and toughness, and makes your creatures better, instead of something that's reliant on you having other creatures on the battlefield, which is not always a given in Limited. But I think it's fine enough. I definitely think that at some point in the format I'm going to be playing this card, and I know that at some point I'm going to lose to it. Hero's Heirloom is a 2-mana equipment with Equip 2 that says equipped creature gets +2/+1, and as long as the creature is legendary, it has trample and haste. This is one of those cards that looks on its face that it's much better than Vanquisher's Axe. It really isn't. Generally speaking, you're giving a bigger boost to power than you are toughness, and the creature that you're attacking with, if it can be blocked, is still going to probably die. The equip cost is basically the same. The mana cost is only 1 higher, and the legendary trample and haste clause is kind of just a tack on. I don't think this does enough to rise up to 5. I think if you are playing a deck where you just have a critical mass of legends, there are just better non-creature spells for you to be casting than random equipments that give them a possible boost if you have nothing better to do. So for that reason, I'm giving this also a 4, similar to the Vanquisher's Axe. It just has some shiny trinket text and some small upsides. Inscribed Tablet is next. It is a 1-mana artifact with 1 tap sacrifice to reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You must put a land card from among them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If you didn't put a card into your hand this way, draw a card. So I believe the way it is worded, that if you reveal a land, you must put it into your hand. However, if you miss, you draw a card anyway. So this is an interesting one. I like it, but I think it is just a 4. I think this is definitely like a 23rd card kind of situation. In fact, it might even be a little bit worse than that. I don't think this is ever a 5. So it's nice that if you miss, you still get a card back, but the thing that you wanted from artifacts like this was to go get your splash color, or go get you a second color of something if you didn't have double something. This card doesn't do that. It looks at the top 5, and you get a land from among them, and if you don't hit the land, you just get the 6th card instead. It also puts the cards on the bottom in a random order, which, however tiny, is still technically a deficit, because you'd love to put those cards there. There will be limited games where you're going to go that deep in your deck. I don't expect that many in this format, but it's definitely possible, especially with the decks that are going to be doing self-mill. So I would not take this card early, or especially often. I think it's a little mana intensive. You're going to want to play 2-drops in this format, and fiddling around with an Inscribed Tablet to maybe hit one of your cards that you're looking for to help you cast your spells is just not what you're looking to do. Joda's Codex is 5 mana for an artifact with Domain, 5 tap, draw a card. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each basic land type among lands you control. So a 5 mana artifact is a little rough when it doesn't have anything to do when it immediately comes into play. However, as soon as it lands and every turn after, if you can reliably get this to cost 1 for the tap draw card, or even sometimes 2, this is going to be an extremely powerful card. What you don't want to do is have this be a card that you're spending 4 or 3 on, because that just is bordering on unplayable. And I don't think you're ever going to be in a circumstance where you're paying 4 to play it and draw a card, but I guess it might happen sometimes. Generally, you're going to be paying 3. The good times you're going to be paying 2 and 1. If you're consistently going to be paying 2 and 1, I think this card shoots up to a 6. And I think if you're going to be paying either 3 most of the time and sometimes 2, then it's going to be closer to a 4. Also, I think this format is looking a little bit aggressive, so I'd be surprised if you could just fiddle around with this. If you're ever just paying 0, just tap, draw a card, this is going to be an insane bomb that you're going to want to play in your deck immediately. But I don't think it's going to happen especially often. Maybe if you're playing the domain deck, it happens 1 out of every 2 or 3 games where you play it. And if you don't have it all the time with the 5, it does get dramatically worse. So for that reason, I think overall it's going to be a card to look out for, and you'll know when you want it. So the grade is definitely variable and contextual. In most decks, I think it's going to be closer to a 4 than it's going to be to a 5. Relic of Legends is a 3-mana artifact with tap, add 1 mana of any color, and tap an untapped legendary creature you control, add 1 mana of any color. Notably, the artifact has this ability, not the creature, so you can tap a creature you've played this turn in order to add 1 mana. This is... So the second ability is practically trinket text. It's useful, but it's not that good. We've seen 3-mana artifacts before that tap to add 1 mana of any color. Usually you want them to do more than just add mana. All this has is a different way to add mana, and it's not that good. I think this card is a 23rd card, even in the decks that are looking to cast their spells. You're never going to be like, oh, thank God I got Relic of Legends, I really can just get there now. You're going to be like, well, I didn't really pick enough lands, I need to cast my spells, I have a Relic of Legends, I guess I'm going to play it. And you're going to be like, eh. But you're going to get to cast your spells, I guess. Walking Bulwark is our next card, and it is a 1-mana 0/3 with Defender. And it says, until end of turn, pay 2 mana. Until end of turn, target creature with Defender gains haste, can attack as though it didn't have Defender, and assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. Activate only as a sorcery. So you can't really use this to make your blocks better, but you can use it to beat down. The problem is, as we've gone over before, this deck is just not very good. There's a couple of defenders in the set that aren't bad, and would be pretty okay on the beatdown, but like, you have to play this, you have to play that, you have to come back to your turn, and then you're going to spend 2 mana to make a good attack. That is a lot of setup, and the payoff realistically is not that good. This is one of the better ways to make that deck actually work, but I still don't think it's worth. If you are all in on that deck, this is going to be like a 5, and if you're not in that deck, and this is just going to turn your random 2/4 wall into a 4/4 that can attack, I think this card is a 3 or lower. Take it as you will, but I would not suggest it. That's going to wrap up all of our commons and uncommons for multicolor and colorless. Next we're going to do green-red, then black-blue, then white and lands. I hope that you've enjoyed the first video in this set review. Please consider leaving a comment, liking, and subscribing. You've been watching Robot Rowless, and have yourself a wonderful night.